Hello, everyone. It's Matt and Moshe. Welcome back to Product for Product. Thanks for tuning in. We're excited to have Jason Knight on the show to discuss using tools in an API platform company and how podcasting has helped him become a better product person. So welcome to the show, Jason. Let's take a sec to introduce yourself.
Thanks very much for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Knight, as has been said, and I'm the product director for a UK fintech called DueDil, and also the host of the up-and-coming product podcast, One Night in Product.
Moshe and I are big fans.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we are. I think we met a bit through your podcast as well, or at least we chatted about it, and it was always great to listen to it and learn from you about podcasting. So
right.
There you go. I like to bring people together.
Yeah, it was one of the things that helped us actually get this one set up. I think some of the things with Moshe having been on your show, I think it was one of the things that, there's a lot of stuff, as you know, to even get started doing podcasting. So
no, absolutely.
There's a lot of things that we didn't anticipate. So it's been a good experience.
I know you're stuck in the cycle of hell, just like me.
Yeah. The hamster wheel, right?
Yeah, people don't realize what it takes to actually do a podcast, and it's really fun to have the discussions. And we always have discussions, and we're like thinking about it. Oh, if I would have recorded it, I could make a podcast out of that. So
yeah.
We are actually doing that, but it's not just that. There is a lot of preparation before and post-production after.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But we'll talk a bit more about the podcast later on. Let's start maybe first with API, because sure. I personally don't know a lot of product managers that are working solely on APIs. I know a lot of product managers that work in product companies. I myself also have done it in the past in a few places where we had one of the interfaces to the application was through an API. But there was also our own user experience front end that we developed. And that was usually the core thing, where the APIs either were part of the architecture. So the developers would use the API as a part of their platform backend to access the logic, to access the data and whatever it is. Part of it was for external users, but it was never just, an API. I would be interested to hear a bit more, about what does it mean for a product manager, and also then what type of products you're using that might be unique in this situation.
Yeah, so just to clarify one small point, whilst DueDil has been very strong in APIs and it's very much the core focus of what we sell, we do also have a web interface which we sell to some people. So it's not only APIs, but it's definitely been a strong focus of the company over the last 18 months or so from before I started. I mean, I started at DueDil at the beginning of January this year, so coming up a year now. It was my first time being a product person working on an API product, but it was something that I'd actually been interested in doing for quite a while, because one of the reasons that I kind of got into product and wanted to build products and do SaaS stuff was to really help to drive things at scale. And the problem that we solve for our users is that we enable them. So our users are primarily banks and financial service providers in the UK. And what we are trying to solve for them is the fact that there's so many manual processes and so much kind of back and forth, for example, to comply with their regulatory commitments, or just to get all of the information that they need to sign up and onboard their customers and allow them to open bank accounts or get loans or stuff like that. So our value proposition was and is that you can use APIs, and if you're a bank, you can integrate with our APIs and you can speed some of that stuff up, because there's a lot of that data out there already. So we obviously consume all that data, we normalize it, we do loads of cool stuff with it, get some additional insight out of it, and then make that available via the APIs and via the web app for people who want that. So it was definitely an interesting journey going into API product management, because touching on the point around tools, it's not like some of the tools aren't the same. So I remember talking to Heap, hope you know Heap, the analytics platform, because that's what we have in our web application. We were, talking to them about our usage and how we might increase our usage or, use it for other use cases, and kind of pointed out to them that whilst something like Heap or competitors like Pendo, who I've used in the past, or Amplitude and all the other people, they do have like APIs themselves that you can kind of hook into and kind of send messages back to. But actually, a lot of those tools aren't really designed for API stuff. because once you're hitting an API, unless you're giving like an individual key to every single person, most of the activity that comes in is going to be, it's potentially like multi-threaded, right? Like 5 people can come in at the same time with the same key from the same company, like signing up 5 different customers for the same bank, all using the same key. And the whole idea of a session starts to fall apart a little bit. So some of the really cool stuff you can do in platforms like Heap and like Pendo, where you can start to get the journeys and the funnels and the behavioral analytics start to become a little trickier to handle without kind of requiring them to send loads of extra information, which they may or may not want to send. So that's been an interesting difference. Like, how do you actually encapsulate the journey that someone's going through with an API versus a web application?
Of the unique user that is using the API or is consuming the API through the application that uses that.
Exactly, yeah. So again, if I've got 5 people coming in, hitting a bunch of endpoints and getting value from our data, that's fantastic. But I don't know which person is actually doing that. So again, the journey that you might want to take to start, again, if you're being data driven and you want to start looking at some of the things that you can do to maybe optimize or work out bits which are sticking in the process or being slower than they could be, becomes a little trickier to do that just by looking at the data. I mean, I guess, we discussed this before. There are definitely ways that you could do it. Like, you could start requiring people to put certain extra information in and kind of make some kind of state in the API calls. So like passing back unique IDs and whatever. But actually, we want our APIs to be lightweight and easy to consume. We don't want to have to maintain state. So, but at the same time, then you start to ask yourself, well, actually, do we actually want to track that stuff, or do we just want to track on a kind of a higher level? So we can't use something like Heap. Heap were very clear that you could hook into a API, but it's not really what it's designed for. You're not going to get that much benefit out of doing that. And I'm sure that other people would say the same. So then you start to think, well, okay, well, what information do we need? So we have logs of all of our API access, and we can do lots of analytics on a macro level, but that's all being handled effectively in-house, although obviously using open source tools.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. The generic, what a token is. Is, being anybody could use it within a company, basically.
Exactly.
You just never have visibility. I hadn't thought about that. That's really fascinating.
Well, another interesting thing as well, though, is like if you've got people using, say, the web app, like, John Smith is using the web app to do something, maybe do some manual checks or something like that. But then also maybe John Smith is also going to his other computer and doing some stuff in some other system that's integrated with the API. In an ideal world, we'd love to just be able to follow that journey, to sit there and say, okay, right, fine. Well, John started here, did some stuff, went back to the other system, did some stuff which hit our API. We know that's John Smith too, and then kind of maybe even ping pong backwards and forwards. But again, quite tricky to do, and arguably not actually that insightful if you think about it. So we've not put a lot of time into that.
Yeah, I think that we are maybe when we're discussing this, we're assuming that everyone that listens to us know how APIs work and what this issue is. But maybe just to clarify a bit for the less technical product managers that maybe not even using APIs, or they just manage products that have front ends and everything is pretty and you can have access to any event that it happens on the front end. With APIs, you authenticate the application to use it. So it's not an authentication of, the 5 users in the example that Jason mentioned. So it's not each one of them is authenticated separately to use API. It's the application that is developing and consuming this API that is being authenticated once for any access to those API and endpoint. And that's why the API doesn't really know who is the actual user that's using this in the front end. And that's this complexity that is raised. And I also, never really thought about it from analytics, maybe because at the time when I developed these APIs, which been a while, I didn't really need it to. So, or I didn't even know what analytics are. But so I'm talking, quite a while ago. You mentioned, some ways maybe to solve it, but they're heavy. But is there a way to solve it, or is it basically a balance between, do we really need this information about specific users, or is it more about the consumption of the API by different applications?
I think the judgment that we've made so far is that there are other things that we can look at, and obviously also talk to people about the usage in, do good quality depth interviews and stuff as well. So it's not like the most valuable problem for us to solve. So we've not solved it yet in good old fashioned product management terms. I think, you can get a lot of information out. Like, for example, you can sit there and look at overall usage and, the requests that are coming in and kind of volume by API keys and stuff like that. One interesting thing kind of related to this on the metrics front is, like, I was thinking a lot about North Star metrics for applications and thinking, well, API hits, number of API hits, that's a fantastic way to do it. But then you start to think, well, actually, no, that's terrible, because if I want to make that number go up, I just start splitting my APIs into multiple endpoints and my hits go up, right? So,
or someone will do an infinite loop to one of the APIs, and then that's a problem as well.
So, that's just a little nugget there that I kind of came across when I was looking at some of this stuff. But I think it's fair to say that from an API perspective, we're very much looking at overall usage and patterns per company rather than trying to drill too much down into the sessions. But then at the same time, alongside that, talking to our customers and talking to our users to make sure that if there are any issues, that we're able to do something about those.
Yeah, and that really brings an interesting question. What is a KPI here, and what is a success for the product? And at the end of the day, the success will fall on the success of your clients and their usage of the APIs. So, and I assume lots of them probably are using products like HIP or like Pendo that you mentioned. Is there do you ask them, to maybe see that information from their end?
So that's an interesting question. So one of the things I was thinking about with regards to, like, whether we could somehow encapsulate a unit of value is, like, well, we don't know what happens once this data leaves our system, right? Because it's an API, it gets consumed by another system and they do something with it. And what they're trying to do, as per the description earlier, is, like, they're trying to get people onboarded and get new customers into their systems more effectively. So you could sit there and say, well, wouldn't it be really great if we could then start getting them to pass back information about, like, when that customer got in, or, loads of the behavioral information around that. It's like, that would be great, but that's a lot of overhead for the other team. And, not all people are that keen to do that. It's, not just with our clients, but anyone, who wants to sit there and push loads of data back that they're not even sure if they're allowed to send back. So again, we've tried to take a simple approach. We're not really sitting there trying to drag too much back in, but that does mean that you're somewhat reliant on proxy metrics. Like, you can't sit there and, I don't know how long it took for someone to actually open an account, for example. I know how long it took for them to get the data from us. And obviously their continual usage of the system presumably means that they're getting some value out of that. But we don't 100% know what happens at the end. And I guess this is something that is similar for any kind of company that's either offering a platform or offering integrations with other platforms, where you're in a situation where the data leaves your estate and anything could happen to it after that. And that's just something that you have to kind of make peace with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
How are you handling from a new software to a legacy system? Not just one API, setting up one API. I mean, that's complex enough, but just setting up various APIs to make sure they all work within a solid platform, a secure platform.
What we've got on our side is a bunch of APIs which solve certain use cases, and from a marketing perspective, we can sell them in different configurations, but we're really managing them as a whole estate. So what we're then, we have solutions consultants that can work with our clients to go and help them with the integration path. And obviously we're reliant very much on engineers at the client organizations to actually get those things integrated if they're integrated with the API. But again, that's not a problem at all, because that's actually something that's going to happen whenever you're offering APIs out to anyone. Like, there's not an easy way to just flick a switch unless you do something which we have started to do, which is start integrating, for example, with standard platforms like standard banking platforms and stuff like that. We announced a partnership a little while ago with a banking platform called Encino, who are very well, they're very popular. They're very well used by a bunch of different banks. So obviously starting to move into that area and actually building integrations on top of the API is quite a useful path, because it means that then they get a little bit closer to being able to just switch that on rather than having to get their IT team or their software development team to do some stuff.
Going back to, our usual theme of products. So data analytics products doesn't seem to be a big part of that based on what we talked before. What other products are you using in your stack?
Yeah, well, I mean, we should say, of course, as I said before, we are still using Heap for the web analytics part of it, though, for the actual web application that we use, and that's going fine. And again, I've used Pendo before and looked at others, but Heap's doing a job. But aside from that, from an API perspective, like you've not got like intercom and stuff like that for popping up little menus and support requests and stuff like that. It's not quite the same interface, of course, because everything's programmatic. We do have tools like that in our web app. So, we've used Intercom and Zendesk and other tools like that to manage some of the web app specific stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we I'm glad to say that we finally turned Jira off the other week and moved over to another platform to actually manage our software development workflow. So
we're interesting. Which one did you?
Well, so yeah, we're using a platform called ClickUp now, which you've probably seen adverts for all over the place. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like a lot of the fundamental jobs that it's trying to do remain similar, but I just find it a more satisfying platform to work with than Jira. But I've not seen a single person anywhere, potentially outside of, or possibly including people in Atlassian, that actually seem to be that happy with Jira. So everyone seems to hate it. So it was an interesting experiment to see if we could move away from it, and actually we have. So that was an interesting
That's very, very interesting. And ClickUp, I've heard about it before, but not in the context of development and product management. I've heard about it more in context of marketing teams and sales teams and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is it integrated with other tools that dev teams usually are using, like source control and things like that?
Can't remember off the top of my head if it's integrated with source control, but it does have integrations with a bunch of different parts of our stack as well. So like we have things going in and out of Slack for notifications and things like that. So it's got all the standard integrations. I mean, basically ClickUp is quote unquote just a project management tool. It's a project management tool like all the other project management tools.
Mm-hmm.
It does have some nice features which help with product development, and you can like ladder things up and down into initiatives and super initiatives and tasks and stuff. It's got all the usual stuff that you'd want. It just seems to hang together a little bit better and not be quite as annoying as Jira. But at the same time, fundamentally, we're using it for the same job. We've still got tasks in there. We're still putting points on stuff. We're still developing things and moving them through them through workflows and stuff. So it's just a slightly nicer tool to do that with.
And it's funny, I was talking in the episodes before about how I'm using Azure DevOps and not Jira these days. And I was actually pleasantly surprised when I started using it. I thought it will be terrible. But, I always had this, I always heard people that have a love and hate relationship with Jira. So it was an interesting thing to move from Jira that I used for many years to another system. And we also interviewed recently Avinoam. He used to work for Atlassian. So, but he didn't work on Jira. He worked on Confluence. And the interesting thing over there was about the culture of Atlassian and how they all use their own products, of course, etc. So maybe they don't hate Jira or have this relationship with Jira. I'm not really sure.
I get this. I get this with Salesforce. Salesforce. Everyone says I have Salesforce, but I haven't met many people that actually like it. They just have it. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, once you get too big, and I'm sure that other platforms and maybe even ClickUp one day will be the same. It'll just be there will be so much stuff bolted on.
Yeah, and
that's obviously something as product people always try not to do, but it's always a temptation as you scale and start to support more diverse use cases that it'll eventually end up going down the same path. But maybe not. But
we'll see what happens in 10, 20 years, right?
Exactly.
We should set up on our calendar to speak again in 10 years and see what happens.
If I'm still speaking about this sort of stuff in 20 years, I'm going to be very
sure you will.
You're episode 1000 or something.
There you go.
Yeah, we'll see how many products will change in the time in between.
Yeah. And we talk about that before, where you don't have to use what the industry standard is in Jira. You ultimately want to use what you're comfortable with. So I think it's great that you're using a different product. You moved over.
But the thing is, I think I'm a big believer, and it's a bit of a cliche, but I'll say it anyway, that you can't fix bad culture or bad processes with tools.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can put as many tools on top of your bad processes as possible, but if you have bad processes in a bad environment, then the tools aren't going to help with that. And I think that maybe some people try and put a little bit too much emphasis on the tools, as like either with Jira trying to have these really restrictive workflows that people set up and all the permissions and stuff. It's like, yeah, look, that isn't actually the problem that you're trying to solve. The problem you're trying to solve is that you're struggling to deliver software. Why don't we have a think about why that might be, and not just sit there trying to tweak Jira settings to mean that the tickets have to go into a certain bucket before they can go to a different bucket. Like that's not the problem.
Mm-hmm. I've seen some nightmarish implementation of Jira that the workflow was so complex that no one could understand it.
Yeah.
And that was exactly the problem. Instead of simplifying it, people were trying to mimic what they
did in the
they
past.
thought was the right way to go. And
yeah,
this was just not.
Yeah, I'd love to just use a Miro board, to be honest. I think I've sort of had that idea before, really go back to basics like it would be in the olden days before everyone went distributed, where you could have like effectively a whiteboard with a bunch of sticky notes on it. Like, you'll miss a few analytics and stuff like that. But again, you need to be concentrating on actually fixing the things that need to be fixed and getting the work done that needs to be getting done, and not worrying too much or obsessing too much over, again, like the shape and size of the sticky notes and the whether you can put points in Fibonacci's or not. Like that, those, you can argue about those things all day, but I would still contest that it's much more important to get things right properly and not just try and lean on the tools too much.
Keep it simple.
For sure. Any other products in your stack that you would like to share with us that might not be unique to API company, but maybe they are? I'm not sure.
Well, we have like an API gateway called Apogee that we use, which is, I think Google own it now, but I'm pretty sure it used to be its own company, which allows a lot of the management of the API to be kind of taken away from us, because I'm a big believer that, like, why would you build something to do something that someone else has already built something to do? That makes any sense at all. And actually, that's something that I would probably say for just about anything. Like, why would you build anything, any tool that there's a tool already out there? Let's use that unless there's such a fatal flaw in it that you can't use it for whatever reason. So be that analytics, be that API management layers, be that any kind of supporting functions like web scraping or whatever that you have to do for your platform to work, or data ingestion or news scraping or stuff like that. It's like there are people out there that do that for a living. Use their expertise, because at best, you're going to have a situation where you've built something that's the same as what they've got, maybe slightly tweaked for your specific use case, but it's never going to be better because it's their job to make it. Unless it's actually IP that you're trying to develop to make your own company more valuable, and it's something that's actually what your company does, I would always recommend using someone else's tool. So we use standard sort of API management layers and stuff to kind of remove a lot of the stresses and strains of rate limiting and access management and stuff like that. Because who's got time to build all that stuff?
Right. And probably also related to billing.
Exactly.
A lot of the things that are API specific is that usually you will bill by usage of the API, by the calls and stuff like that. Exactly.
Yeah, and quotas and stuff like that as well for certain endpoints. So it's really useful to just have something that does that for you, and then you can concentrate on adding the value and the actual business logic that does the things that no one else can do, rather than spending all your time running around the houses trying to get a quota implemented into an API. It's just nonsense to try and do that.
What about things like discovery and experimentation? Is there a way to do stuff like that in APIs? Or is that more of like, I'm just exposing a different version or a different endpoint and let the user try different APIs?
So I think the dirty secret of API integrations is, of course, that they take a bit of time, potentially take a bit of time to get actually implemented by your users. Like, unless you're a public API that anyone can use and they can kind of just do it whenever they want. If you're working, as we talked earlier, with a big enterprise, they're not going to integrate you in a day. There's going to be processes to go through at their end. There's going to be, you're plumbing into their business systems, and they just want those things to work. So the idea that I'm going to then all of a sudden start doing A/B tests on our users and turning bits of functionality on and off, or moving fields around, or whatever else, like that's not going to fly. I think, and this is, to be honest, something that is a fairly common B2B thing. Like if you're in the back office of, even with a web app, people are relying on the tool that you're giving them, kind of acting the same until you've told them otherwise. Not just changing stuff like Facebook, changing their button positions or whatever.
And you have to warn them in advance, because they have to do their own development if something changes.
Exactly. So I think the way that I like to approach it is like, it's more like, rather than A/B tests and experiments via that method, it's more like beta programs, and either beta programs with the API. So like you can say, okay, here's this new endpoint or this new version of an endpoint that you can have a look at, or you try and get some kind of implementation through into some kind of web application, just so that they can actually play around with it. But it's very much guided. You have to get people to want to do that. You can't just experiment them on them in the same way, because again, if we change a field around and one of our clients can't get customers for a day because it broke something, that isn't going to go down very well at the next renewal conversation.
So do you see new requirements or feedback coming more from developers that are consuming the APIs, or business people that decided to use those, your service for, building their product?
Yeah, I'd say primarily speaking, it's the business. So, we're not building technical APIs for the sake of technical APIs. We're building APIs that serve use cases that deliver value to the businesses. So we don't want to think of our APIs as like purely technical resources. I mean, obviously they are fundamentally technical resources. You have to plug them in and you have to integrate with them and so forth. But what we want to do is concentrate on the use cases. We're sitting there and we're saying, you can use our APIs to answer these questions. And if there's a new question that we can't answer for you, then let's talk about that and either augment an API that we already have, or create a new API endpoint that we didn't have yet, and kind of approach it from that. So yeah, I think from a technical perspective, if technical people wanted to get features out of us, I think it would be kind of strange. It's more like whether there's anything that makes it harder to integrate. Sure, I'd expect that kind of feedback, but most of the kind of quote unquote feature requests or enhancements are business led.
At the end of the day, they want to make sure they're getting the data, it's secure, and that they can complete the job on the other end of the whatever other tool they're using. Or
I see APIs as an implementation method, not the actual product itself.
And another question just popped in my mind is related to platforms like iPaaS. I think that's what they're called, for integrating different systems together. And many, I think in some cases, they also include APIs platforms, so integrated to other platforms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys are doing as well?
It's definitely something that I want to do, and it's something that we're always keeping an eye on. There's a lot of platforms out there that do things, even things like the AWS data, whatever it's called, like the market that you can get on there, where you can just connect into different data sources, making data available to BI platforms and integration platforms, and as we said earlier, to banking platforms like Encino, which is a platform that banks can use. And then if we're in there, then they can just effectively turn us on. Stuff like that, I think, is very interesting. I think, as with anything product management related, it then becomes a prioritization decision. It's not a bad idea. Right. It's not that it's not a good idea. It's more like it has to be valuable, and people need to want to use that particular system or integration before we'd really consider doing it. But it's definitely something that I think is essential for any kind of enabling product to be able to be at the part of it, or at the center of an ecosystem.
Is like a Zapier? Is that kind of?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. It's probably the most known example, but there are many other platforms like that.
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest. We've used no-code platforms before to demonstrate bits of functionality, because it's a really easy way to do it, and it also enables you to kind of demonstrate things without having to go through a whole dev cycle. Yeah, if an API is available, then you can pull that data out and represent it in some way, and I think that's a really good way to demonstrate the value of an API, because when people are buying these APIs, or when people are buying these products, they're not buying an API, they're buying the question or the answer to the question that the API answers. And not every single person that's involved in that decision actually has a lot of understanding about what a JSON object output looks like. They might need to see it in a different way, and it's completely valid for them to want to see it in a different way. You just need to start thinking of ways that you can represent that on screen, either with like little mock-ups and prototypes or using no-code tools to kind of update a Google Sheets or something like that, just to show them that something's happening in a way that they can more easily consume and understand themselves.
It's a great point. The problem you're solving is not, they don't really care how it works, but
yeah,
you're trying, I want to get from A to B, and how can I do that? How can you solve my problem?
They don't want to see the animals getting chopped up. They just want a nice, tasty sausage, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
But that is definitely a cool addition to your stack of products, the no-code platforms. Mm-hmm. And we're planning to do a series on that in the future. So
that's a big growth area as well. I think it's something that's really good for entrepreneurs, because they can kind of come out with prototypes and even working products that they don't need to have developers for and stuff like that. So that's definitely a good area. But I think in any circumstance, you should always, as a product manager, be comfortable playing with some of these tools and, for example, using them to do little experiments yourself, or kind of experiment with more kind of live looking things rather than everything having to go through development. Because development resource, you've never got enough of it, right? There's always more things to do than you have developers to do them. And you want those developers concentrating on things that are actually going to bring as much value as possible. I'm not, this isn't controversial. That's what all product managers think. But at the same time, if you are able to do any kind of experimentation yourself in a controlled setting with some of these no-code tools, I think that's a really valuable thing to be able to do.
Now, let's change topic a bit. We wanted to also hear from you about your experience as a podcaster. And we talked a bit about it when we started this. I believe up to now you already have about 80 episodes, and you talked with many product managers from all over the world, and also some really key figures in our industry, like Martin Kagan and Teresa Torres and many others that wrote exceptional books, and they're really all over the place. How does that experience help you as a product manager?
I think for me, one of the things that was very clear to me when I started out was product management can feel quite lonely sometimes, especially when you're working maybe in a bigger company, as I was when I started out. But then even when you're working in smaller companies, but you don't have a big network and you don't really have a lot of people to validate things that you think, and a lot of people that you're working with don't really understand product management at all, because they're not product managers, or it's completely understandable for them to not understand some of the things that you think are important. And obviously part of your job is to help to enunciate some of those thoughts and explain why it is important. But at the same time, if you're kind of feeling adrift and alone, then it can be quite challenging. So the thing that the podcast has really given me, and it's given me a few things, and obviously one of the things it's given me has really been, frankly, it's a great networking opportunity. I've met people outside of my bubble all around the world and had some really great conversations, either with people specifically on the podcast or with people who have listened to the podcast and reached out to me afterwards. So it's been a fantastic network builder. And it's also enabled me to have really conversations that I probably didn't deserve to have, like on the merits of my own background. I'm fine. I've got a job and I've been working in product for a few years now, and I'm definitely not a bad product person. But at the same time, I'm not like a top table person that sits in smoky rooms with all these book authors and stuff like.
Yeah.
So it was a surprise to me. Like, I started out talking to some people that I knew, or to some people that were in my network, or people that had kind of been referred to me. But then after a while, obviously, as we said, started talking to people like Marty Kagan and Teresa Torres and Christina Woodkey and loads of other people that have written all these cool books. And I think, to be fair, when people release books, they're pretty much always prepared to talk to anyone. So that's always a great sort of jump starter. And I definitely recommend it. Like, you can get access to people because they're on a promotional tour, which is great. But also at the same time, having conversations with some of these people and some of the other people that haven't written books, but are just generally good product people, has been really amazing for a few things. It's been amazing for my sort of the way that I enunciate what product management is. It's challenged some of my own assumptions. I've had some great discussions about some fairly detailed elements of product management, and kind of challenged my thinking, enabled me to express myself in different ways. I don't have any fear of talking about product management anymore, because I've spoken to so many people about it that it's almost like a cliche. Like, I can just do it as pretty much at the drop of a hat. And I think, as I was saying before this call, like, I'm not 100% sure like how many of the opinions that are now in my head are things that I already had versus ones that I've kind of just absorbed from this sort of meta mind of the entire podcast communities.
Yeah.
I kind of see it as being radicalized. You know, I've spoken to all these people in and around product management, some of these thought leaders and all these people that have got, you know, they're frankly way more successful or they've had far longer careers. And I've kind of been tapped straight into them, getting all of their knowledge, all of their opinions, all of their thoughts. And to be honest, it does sometimes make me feel a bit like I'm always on because, you know, you're always thinking about this stuff. But at the same time, I think just having access to that body of knowledge and that kind of the community that comes with it, I think has been transformative for me.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with that. I've only been in product fairly recently. I come from the data analytics background. So getting into product, doing the podcast with Moshe and speaking with guests like you and several others, I mean, it's just been really eye-opening and really has grown my collective thought in terms of all the different areas that product management encompasses, I guess. So yeah, it's there's just so many things when it comes to product management. It's really hard to define it as one thing because you can work in so many realms. And that's what really drove me to it from a fascination standpoint. And the podcast has helped that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's that is definitely what you mentioned about being in a community and not being alone. That definitely drew me into, especially with COVID and working from home, that you're not even in physical space with other people, not product managers, but just people that you're working with.
Right.
Just created this void that I had to fill in. So, and like you were saying, talking about it for so long, I do see how it helps with just talking about product management at any time.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Like, so I've always wanted to kind of get my voice out there. You know, I've been around the block a few times. I'm in my mid-40s now. You know, I've got some general business stuff that I want to talk about because I've been working for quite a while now. And I've got a lot of experience in different areas. And at the same time, so have lots of other people. I'm definitely not special, but I've really been in a situation in the past where mentorship has been really important to me, either mentorship for me or me giving mentorship to other people as they've kind of been following behind. And I kind of saw podcasting as an extension of that, really. Like, it's a way to not only sort of train myself and teach myself and understand things from some of these people, but also to share hopefully inspirational stories or perspectives with other people that maybe slightly earlier in their career that maybe do think that everything's all going wrong and it's all horrible. And look, I'm not at all claiming that my podcast or any of the episodes of my podcast are going to fix someone's suboptimal job situation. But at the same time, if you can inspire people to think about different things or go to their boss with a different type of question or use some of the great experience of my guests to really help them understand what they might do, then that feels valuable. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know everyone that listens to my podcast. I'm sure I know a bunch of them, but I'm sure there are some people out there that are listening to it and just kind of treating it as just background noise. And I'm sure that there are some people that hang on to every word. And I'm sure that there's a whole spectrum of people in between. But from my perspective, it's been really great to try and help to pay something back and use some of my opinions mixed up with some of the much more interesting opinions from the people that come on to try and help people along a little bit.
That's excellent. And that's the way I feel. I've been listening to podcasting for a very long time, and I always wanted to do a podcast. And I was also looking for mentorship, and what better way than to get introduced to people like Moshe, like yourself, like all those other people that normally I would have spoken to. And I think podcasting has really helped that. It's helped me become a better person, a better product manager. You know, your show and all these other shows, it's really helped my collective mind to help me. Like you're saying, you're always kind of on. I think I'm always thinking about this stuff, even when I'm not, on the computer. It's always in the back of my mind, whether I'm listening to something. So, but I think that's a positive because I think it's always moving me forward. You know, it's always propelling me to think about things differently, giving me a new perspective. And that's really what I was going for. That's what I was going for with our podcast here. And I think that's definitely helped me.
Yeah. And frankly, also, it helps you if you have any issues with your voice or your presentation style or how
Absolutely.
you practice for things, it has a massive impact on that. Like I look back on old recordings of me, or I listen to old recordings of me, and obviously I've learned a lot over that time. I've learned how to maybe interrupt my ums and ahs and not to go off down stupid tangents all the time, and really kind of focused a lot of my communication style, which I think has been really helpful. But also another thing actually that it really does help with regards to product management is like our job, or at least a big part of our job, is to speak to users, question users, understand a bit about their world, ask really good questions, really good follow-ups to understand and do that good old-fashioned discovery that we're all supposed to be doing, and probably most of us don't do enough of. Now, there's no better way to practice interviewing people than interviewing people.
Yep.
And of course, it's a different type of interview, and it's asking different questions of different types of people. But at the same time, anything you can do to practice kind of delivery and inquisition techniques and other ways to just get into and follow up on and wobble teeth in different areas, like you need to be able to do that to be a good interviewer of people when you're doing that product discovery. And I think that it's been an additional kind of unexpected benefit that it has meant that, like, when I go into interviews, and frankly, even in the past when I've gone into job interviews, I was applying for this job last year when I was already doing the podcast, and you kind of find that you kind of settle into a rhythm because you know how to present stuff, you know how to talk about this stuff, and you know how to do this. And that is actually, again, just really helpful. And if I look at me now compared to, say, 2 or 3 years ago, I would say that my communication style, whilst it will never be perfect, has definitely come on leaps and bounds. And I definitely recommend to anyone, even if they don't do a podcast, for as long as we have, or even if they don't do a podcast at all, but definitely look at it and say, well, record myself, watch it back, listen back, start to actually understand. Everyone hates doing that. No one likes looking at videos of themselves. No one likes listening to audio of themselves. I mean, I don't have any problem listening to audio of myself anymore because I've done it for so long now that it doesn't matter. Video, I still have a love-hate relationship with the video side of things, but that's the next thing to work on. Yeah. But there's no better way to understand how you sound, appear, present to people than just actually gritting your teeth, watching it back, picking out some of the things that you wouldn't like when you were saying, like, if you were the other person, that person would sit there and say, oh, well, when Jasom was presenting to me, he was umming and ahhing all over the place. He was making those stupid noises and he kept going down tangents and whatever else. Like, you can start to identify those things. And if you start to identify them, then you can start to fix them or accept them and work with them. But I think it's very difficult. I mean, I remember watching a video of me once, like a training video that was recorded for my old job. And I couldn't believe that my mouth moved like that. Like, I didn't think that my mouth moved like that. And I was like, my God. And, it's not like it moves badly, but it's just like, that wasn't how I thought I looked. And it's the same for how you look, and it's the same for how you sound. The only way to get better at doing that stuff, if you have like ambitions to communicate or ambitions to present, or ambitions to do any of this stuff, is to actually, again, grit your teeth and just look or listen and work on what bothers you.
Even if you don't put it out there,
exactly,
do it for yourself. I think it has a lot of benefits.
Yeah, exactly. As product managers, storytelling is really important, and not knowing how to tell a story is something that we have to learn. And then by talking about something, we actually we know when you talk out loud, you use different areas of your brain that it's not the same when you write it or when you just think about it. And then you, as you practice it, you become better and better in storytelling. So that's definitely helpful. I can see how that helps to every product manager. Everyone can find you on your podcast, that's for sure. We talked about your podcast for so long. It's One Night in Product, and night is spelled like your last name, like with a K.
Exactly, yep.
So One Night in Product. So I encourage everyone to go and listen to many of the great episodes over there. Where else can everyone find you?
Well, I'm relatively active on Twitter these days at @OneJasonKnight. Happy to get that put in some show notes, I guess. And I'm also available on LinkedIn as well. So happy to speak to people on either of those places. I'm also trying to get into polywork a bit more because, I interviewed the polywork people a little while ago and I thought it'd be nice to join in there. Still trying to get to grips with that a little bit, but yeah. So I'd say Twitter and LinkedIn are my best places at the moment.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Jason. This has been a pleasure.
No problem.
Two great topics. I'm really fascinated about APIs and integrations, and obviously with podcasting. So once again, thank you so much for coming on, Moshe. Thanks, and to all the listeners, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.